Unapologetically Gangster, the Don Kawand story. Book 1, Story 10. Subtitle, Marlboro and Coney Island. After my violent antics at Setlow, they transferred me to IS 281, aka Cavallaro. The school was closer to the project, but still in a dangerous part of Bensonhurst. It was about 10 blocks in a direction straight behind my building. There was no taking the yellow bus. Therefore, I had to be brave and footed every day back and forth. The journey was nervous. There was always the chance of running into a group of rowdy white Italians. Even though the walk home was safer with other kids, still a hazardous path to travel. Cavallaro was mixed just like Cephala. There was a bunch of white kids and a large population of black kids, both from Coney Island and Marlboro. The only difference is that the kids from Marlboro mostly lived on the other side of the projects. Now, I lived in Marlboro long enough to understand that there was a dislike between the two sides. The kids on the other side could care less about the kids that lived on my side. I don't know if it was a real dislike or everyone was just comfortable with being around the building that they lived close to. But whatever the reason was, I ignored the unwritten rule. But anyway, in Cavallaro, I'd meet a bona fide bully that lived on the other side named Rel, currently known as Wise True. He was taller and a brown-skinned fella that had a permanent bop in his strut. His shoulders swung from left to right as he moved through the projects with confidence. I'd seen him a few times in the hood. One day I was walking my dog and he was with some kids that tried to take my sneakers until I backed them down with a tree branch. Yeah, I was about to bust a head open until they started laughing and kept on moving. Therefore, I was a little familiar with the young boy before Cavallaro. He'd take a liking to me after running into me one day in the lunchroom, and we had on the same sneakers. We'd grow closer over time and eventually become best friends during the early 1980s. I wrote a whole book on us called The Hood Keepers, so I'm not going to get into all the antics and bullying we did. But I must say that we referred to ourselves as T.O.B., the Arm Brothers, for a short period of time. There was a rival crew called HBO, Homeboys Only, and they were some well-dressed, fly young boys. Rel and I, at times, dressed alike. We dressed in brand new solid-colored BVD nylon t-shirts, Izod or Latique shorts with matching Adidas or Pumas. In the winter, we had the newest leather bombers and sheepskins. Now, the HBO crew were good kids, unlike us. We knew they had a crew, but no one would admit it when we pressed up on them. But most of the kids in Marlboro projects we terrorized. We even chased those from Coney Island or from across town out of Marlboro. Whether young or old, it didn't matter. When in school, we took kids' lunches. True would tap them on the shoulder, and when their heads turned, he'd snatch the burger right off their tray. And we truly abused those that were weak. Sometimes in the projects, we'd catch some high school kids coming from John Dewey High School, and we'd put hands on them for no reason at all. Yes, there was a wicked spirit running through my soul by the time I was 12 years old. And I must admit, it was better to be the bully than to be chased by them. At least that's how it was growing up in Brooklyn. Now, I know I said I wasn't going to give you any details, but I gotta tell you how my boy True took me and the homies to Gladiator school and how we caught our first case. Yeah, he was my first co-defendant and wouldn't be my last. This is the end of story 10, the Don Kawand story. Stay tuned for story 11. Unapologetically Gangster, the Don Kawand story. Book 1, Story 11. Subtitle, Marlboro and Coney Island. Now, don't get me wrong. True and I put it on anyone and always admired when they fought back. We took it as practice after sparring with one another and building lobbies. Sometimes we'd slapbox with each other, put on some boxing gloves, or throw body shots at one another while inside of the elevator. Something that took place during a game we called corners. A game we played when it was more than 4 of us getting in an elevator. Whoever got stuck in the middle had to fight for a corner as the elevator moved up or down. That was Gladiator school for us. Now, my dude coincidentally lived in building 25 on the other side of the projects. This building housed the roughest boys on his side. It's located on what we call the dark side of the projects. A bunch of no-nonsense young fellas lived in this building at one time or another. True was just one, and probably was the youngest. There was an older brother that lived in the building named Michael Eaton. I'd seen him on my side when I was younger, putting hands on someone, something serious. The boy held his own. Mike had no quorum with letting his hands fly, but there was a handful of siblings that lived in the building that grew into popping them things, but I'll be mentioning them later. Now let me explain to you that even though I was young, I was moving against the grain. There was an unwritten rule that the kids that lived on my side didn't rock with the kids on the other side, and vice versa. Even as a youngster, something always made me feel like I can go anywhere I wanted to go. Kids on my side of the projects were uncomfortable with me hanging out on the other side, and those that lived on the other side twisted their faces when seeing me over there chilling, making me probably the most despised young boy in the hood. But my dude knew I cared less about the unwritten rule. We had a knuckle game, and the streets were paying attention. He was never afraid to come to my side, but to be honest, we hung out on his side of the projects more than anywhere else. We were misfits that spent most of our time drinking, smoking weed, and fighting. Fighting is something we did every day, only because we weren't into basketball like others. If we went to the basketball court, it was to ruin the game. Whenever we weren't getting our heads twisted or scrapping, we'd take train rides to Flatbush, sometimes to pick up some bud and sometimes just to walk around. The train was always a dangerous place. The last car on the train is where the party was. Anything went on in the back of the train car. Someone always had a radio playing. Everyone would be drinking and smoking freely. This is how it was in the 80s in Brooklyn. We spent the summer of 1982 taking a train in the Staten Island ferry to a pool in Staten Island. Most of the teenagers in the projects took that trip instead of going to the beach. True and I became the kids parents told their children to stay away from. We got into all kinds of crazy activity. Hanging out on the top of elevators while they were moving was our favorite. When it snowed, we were the first ones to hang out on the corner, waiting for a car to stop at the stop sign. Then we'd grab a hold to the back bumper and let it drag us up and down West 11th Street. We called it skitching, skiing, but with our sneakers. Most of the older kids admired and respected us. We hung out with a couple of other young boys, but True and I were front and center with every move we made. And when we wasn't running around on the streets, getting into something, we were in my spot on the DJ set, mixing the latest hip-hop music. But sometime in 1984, it would be a painful day when his parents packed him up and moved into a house in Bed-Stuy. Bainbridge Street, between Malcolm X and Patchen Avenue, would be his new stomping grounds. True, his sister Glennis and I took some of their things to the new house on the train. No one was in the house when we got there, so we decided to go to the store and get a cigar and Christian the new house with a smoking session. Yes, I would miss the homie in the hood, but he gave me a place to visit on the weekends. He would represent in Bed-Stuy just like in Marlboro. It was always a pleasure for me to pull up on the block and meet some of the rough new young boys that he had befriended. Oh yes, without a doubt, Bainbridge had a couple of thorough young misfits that I rubbed elbows with on the strength of True. Unlike Marlboro, Bedford-Stuyvesant was filled with mischievous adolescents. The trip across town was always a dangerous adventure, a trip I would begin to take frequently with my heart on my sleeves. This is the end of Story 11, the Don Kawand story. Stay tuned for Story 12. Unapologetically Gangster, the Don Kawand story. Book 1, Story 12. Subtitle, Marlboro and Coney Island. Before True relocated, I'd meet and mix it up with a scrappy young fella from CI. I was dating a cute light-skinned girl with a fatty below her waist that lived in a building right next to True's. We did a little kissing and rubbing on one another, and that was about it. I was too young for anything else. But one hot summer day, while we were acting grown, she tells me that this kid that didn't live in the projects tried to holler at her. He was riding through the hood in a white tank top t-shirt on a huge sky blue and white old school bike. The tires had a white stripe around them, the ones with the big wheels and funny handlebars. And if I'm not mistaken, the bike had a basket on the front. He had the appearance of being soft as hell, but I would learn differently. Being the troubled young boy that I used to be, I runs up on him. He was all for mixing it up, but not at that moment. He rode off through the big park on the other side of the projects and toward my side. A few moments later, this young boy returned with some certified bad boys from Building 3. He was cool with a kid named
Theo, aka Baby Crumb, man.
He was the only young cat that I knew at the time that had the luxury to be in Coney Island and Marlboro comfortably. He lived in CI with his moms, but came to Marlboro to visit his granny that lived on the first floor in Building 3. He was a short, red in the face looking kid that was loved and respected by the big boys in Building 3. He was the shortest out of the crew from Building 3, just like I became the shortest that was loved and admired by the older cats in 30 Rock, although I didn't live in the building. We knew each other, but never had any run-ins at this time in our lives. Peen was front and center with this young boy from CI. They were coming through the big park about 5 to 7 strong. But out of the entire group, there was one that concerned me.
Rome, well-known goon from Crosstown.
Rome was much older and originally from Bed-Stuy, Gates and Nostrand Avenue to be exact, a rough part of Brooklyn. He loved coming to the hood to visit his grandmother that also lived in Building 3. Before that day, I had seen him scrapping with a few cats in the projects before. He seemed to love a really good altercation. I had seen him get it on in the staircase with a cat from 30 Rock one time, and it was brutal. He also stayed mixing it up with anyone from the other side, particularly Building 25. He is what I would call a gangster's gangster. Unlike a bully, he brought it to anybody that moved like they was tough, and it looked as if he was bringing it to me. But it turns out he was just making sure that the kid from CI got a fair one. Now remember, I know these dudes, but I didn't really rock with them like that at this time in my life. But I'm gonna get back to them in a minute. Stay with me with this kid from CI. He came back to knuckle up with me like a real one supposed to. Now I understood why he had the crew with him. It was 3 real reasons. 1, he was in a different hood. 2, the tension was serious. And 3, I had approached them aggressively. I can't remember if True or anyone else in the crew was around, but it didn't matter. Out of all the fights I've ever had, this one is in my top 3 best. This dude mixed it up with me for at least a good 30 to 40 minutes. A heavyweight fight between 2 stubborn young knuckleheads. Rome kept breaking it up whenever we got to wrestling instead of boxing, but neither one of us wanted to quit. We was both hostile, could take a blow, and was slick-mouthing with each other at the same time. By the end of the fight, we had multiple war scars, busted noses, knees scraped up, and spitting blood. We were tussling so long the entire crowd left us alone. And would you believe after the fight, I sat on a bench as he sat across from me on this concrete grassy area regrouping. While regrouping, we began hurling disrespectful comments back and forth. It was comical when you think about it, but that's how it played out. It was as if I was looking in a mirror. I'd been fighting myself. This young bull from Coney Island stood his ground. As I grew older, I had no choice but to respect this dude that everyone called June. June was about my height, a short, scrappy fella that lived on 23rd Street between Surf and Mermaid and Coney Island. And as long as I lived on that side of town, the building had a reputation for breeding nothing but gangsters, hustlers, and bosses. It was a building on an island that everyone knew to stay away from unless you were built tough. I later discovered that June hung out in Coney Island with a group of thieving misfits that called themselves the 10 Thieves. And although they called themselves the 10 Thieves, it was really about 50 of them gritty little street dudes. I'd eventually get up close and personal with most of them. The next time we saw one another, we'd be on Rikers Island. And although we banged it out on the streets behind them bars, it was nothing but love. Coney Island and Marlboro were one, and he and I got to know each other very well, but not before I had a run-in with another member from the 10 Thieves. This is the end of Story 12, the Don Kawand story. Stay tuned. If you know a young boy that like to swing them hands early, click like and share, cause somebody needs to hear this.